At 60, I do this in secret, and my erection came back with full strength. Your doctor won't mention this. I am 60 years old, and 3 mornings a week before the sun is fully up, I do something in my backyard that my neighbor once watched me do through his window and then came over to ask if I was training for something. He's 44. I told him no. I told him I was just doing what I do now. He stood there for a moment, looked at me the way younger men look at older men when they're trying to figure out what went differently, and then he went back inside. What I do takes about 20 minutes. It has nothing to do with weights, nothing to do with supplements on its own, and nothing to do with anything a doctor ever told me. It is part of a combination of things I put together over the course of about a year and a half, after the medical system told me, without using those words exactly, that what I was experiencing was simply what 60 looks like. I did not accept that. And if you're watching this, I don't think you're ready to accept it either. Stay with me until the end of this video. Not for my sake, because what shifted everything for me is not what you're expecting, and it comes later. And it's worth every minute you spend getting there. If you've felt it, you know what I mean when I say that the worst part isn't the body failing. The worst part is the silence around it. I'm 60. I was in the military for over 20 years, not as an officer, as a man who did the work, the physical kind, the kind that leaves something in you after it's over. I married late in life. My first marriage ended. My second one, the one that counts, started when I was 48. She knew me before all of this started happening. She knew the version of me that didn't have this problem. That matters. It changes what the silence means. The moment I knew I had to stop looking the other way was a Saturday morning. We had no plans. The kind of morning that used to carry its own energy. You know what I mean? You've had those mornings too, or you remember having them. I woke up and lay there and felt nothing. Not tired, not anxious, just absent. Like the signal that used to come automatically had stopped transmitting, and no amount of waiting was going to bring it back. I lay there for maybe 20 minutes. My wife was still asleep, and I made a decision that morning that I would stop pretending I wasn't aware of what was happening. That particular form of self-deception had cost me enough already. I had been to 2 doctors by that point. The first one ran a standard panel and told me my levels were within normal range for your age. I asked him what that meant in practical terms. He said, and I remember this clearly, that some changes were part of aging gracefully. I was 57. I did not feel graceful. I felt erased. The second doctor was better, more attentive, less rushed. He offered me the medications. I asked him what the medications did exactly, what the mechanism was, why the body had stopped doing on its own what the medication was supposed to trigger. He gave me an answer that was technically accurate and completely unsatisfying. The medication works on the blood vessels in that area, he said. It opens them up. I asked why are they not opening on their own. He said that's a harder question. And then he moved on. That harder question is the one that actually matters. And it's the one nobody in a standard medical appointment has time to sit with. The medications didn't become part of my life, not because I have any particular position on them, I don't, but because I became fixated on the harder question. Why was the system that used to work on its own no longer working? What had changed? And was it reversible? I spent the next few months being angry about not knowing the answer. That anger turned out to be useful. The thing that broke me open happened during a period when I was already in a dark place about all of this. I had been reading, not medical journals, I don't have that kind of background, but real reading, the kind you do when desperation replaces skepticism and you stop caring whether something sounds credible and start caring only whether it might be true. I had stumbled onto something about how the body produces a particular compound, a gas, essentially, made naturally inside the walls of the blood vessels, that is responsible for those vessels relaxing and widening when they need to. When that compound is produced in sufficient quantity and the vessels are healthy enough to respond to it, things work the way they're supposed to work. When production drops, or when the vessel walls have become less responsive over years of inflammation and poor circulation, the signal is there, but the system doesn't answer. I had never heard this explained. not by either doctor, not once. I was sitting in my kitchen reading about this. It was late, the house was quiet, my wife had gone to bed, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Not hope exactly, more like the specific frustration of a man who has just found out that the answer was available and nobody with a medical degree bothered to mention it. I kept reading. I found that certain things actively support the body's ability to make this compound, and certain things destroy that ability faster than aging alone would. And I found that some of the damage was reversible if addressed before too much time had passed. That was the night everything changed direction. I want to tell you what I found and began using, because it's part of this story, and it would be dishonest to leave it out. I had been resistant to the idea for a long time, not because I distrusted the supplement industry specifically, though I had my doubts. My resistance was simpler and more stubborn than that I had been through 2 doctors and a lot of reading and a lot of time, and I had developed the conviction that if medicine with all its science and all its years of studying men's bodies hadn't given me an answer, then a capsule with plant ingredients wasn't going to be the thing. That conviction felt rational. It also turned out to be wrong. What shifted it was not a person. It was a passage in something I read about a specific plant, an Eastern plant, used for centuries, with documented action on those same blood vessel walls. The documentation wasn't marketing language. It was the kind of dry, technical language that nobody writes to sell something. It described what the plant's active compounds did to the smooth muscle cells in the vessel walls, the same cells that respond to the compound I'd been reading about all evening. The 2 things were connected. I ordered what the passage was pointing me toward. I want to be honest about my state of mind. When I did, I was not optimistic. I ordered it with the same energy a man orders something he expects to return. I put it on my nightstand and started the next morning and told nobody. What I was using had 2 things in it that I paid attention to. One was horny goat weed, an Eastern plant that has been used for over 2,000 years, and that works specifically on the walls of the blood vessels involved in what we're talking about. The other was tribulus, something that signals the body to maintain its own hormonal production, rather than letting it drift downward with the years. I didn't understand the full mechanism at the time. I understood it the way a man who is not a scientist understands something. This does this and this does that, and together they work on the thing that matters. What I noticed didn't come in the first week, or the second. I had given myself 8 weeks, and told myself that if nothing happened by then, I would consider it settled. Somewhere around the 6th or 7th week, I'm not being precise because I wasn't tracking it, which is probably why what happened registered the way it did. My wife said something to me one morning that she hadn't said in a long time. She didn't say it with any drama. She said it quietly, the way people say things that matter in long marriages. She asked if something was different. Not in a worried way. In a curious way. In the way someone asks when they've noticed something good and aren't sure yet if it's real. I said I thought so. She nodded. That was it. But I remember exactly where I was standing in the room when she said it, and I remember what it felt like to be asked that question by her, of all people, after 2 years of not being asked. The link to what I use is in the description. Not because I think everyone should rush to it. Because it would be strange to tell this part of the story and then not say where it came from. Read what's in it. Make your own judgment. But there is more to what changed things than that, and I want to get to it now. The first thing I understood, the hard way, not from a doctor, was what chronic tension does to circulation in the body below the waist. I spent over 20 years in environments where tension was not a psychological state. It was a physical one. It lived in the muscles, in the jaw, in the way the shoulders sit when you're always preparing for something. That kind of tension doesn't disappear when the circumstances change. It becomes a baseline the body believes is normal. And when the body is chronically contracted, not dramatically, just persistently, the circulation to peripheral areas, the ones farther from the center, suffers first. I discovered this not through reading, but through a specific experience. About a year before everything improved, I spent a week doing something completely physical and outdoors. Not strenuous, just consistent movement in open air. By the fourth or fifth day, I noticed something I could not explain at the time. I felt different. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Something in the lower half of my body felt more present, more alive. I didn't connect it to what I was dealing with until much later. The connection is this sustained, gentle movement, particularly movement that involves the legs, the hips, the pelvis, acts directly on the circulation to those areas. It is not exercise in the conventional sense. It is circulation maintenance, like running water through pipes that have been sitting still. The pipes don't open up immediately, but they open. A long-running study following men between 50 and 75 found that those who maintained regular physical movement, not intense training, just consistent daily movement, had measurably better vascular function in peripheral areas compared to those who were sedentary, even when other variables were controlled. The mechanism was not mystery movement produces the compound I described earlier. The body makes more of it when the muscles are working and need the vessels to open. The more frequently you trigger that signal, the more responsive the system becomes. The most common mistake is to think this means going to a gym. It doesn't. It means not sitting still for 4 or 5 hours in a row. It means walking. It means using the legs. It means giving the body a reason to circulate. What I do 3 mornings a week is 20 minutes of movement outside. Slow, deliberate, involving the full lower body. No weights, no equipment, just motion. Every week without exception. That's it. Here, before I go further, if what I'm saying is reaching you the way I hope it is, do something for me. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the numbers, because there is a man watching this right now who has been dismissed by his doctor and is about to give up. And the only way this reaches him is if the algorithm sees that this kind of conversation matters. You might be the reason he finds it. The second thing I changed was what I ate in the first half of the day. This one surprised me more than anything else. Not because the idea was complicated, but because I had been doing the opposite for years without realizing what it was costing me. I had always eaten light in the mornings and heavier as the day went on. It felt logical. Appetite increases through the day. The heaviest meal at the end makes sense socially. You eat with people in the evening. What I did not know was that the body's hormonal output, the one we are talking about, is highest in the morning and tapers through the day. And the fuel the body uses to produce that output has to be available during that window to make a difference. Think of it this way: a factory that produces a specific thing runs its main production shift in the morning. If the raw materials arrive in the afternoon, when the main shift is winding down, production is always lower than it could be. The timing of the supply matters as much as the supply itself. What I changed was simple. I began eating a real meal in the morning, one with substance, with enough quality fat and enough protein to give the body what it needed during the hours it was most likely to use it. Eggs mostly, something with real fat in it, not the stripped-down version of food. And I lightened the evening considerably. The European Journal of Clinical Nutrition published findings following men in the 55 to 70 range, showing that those whose caloric intake was weighted toward the earlier part of the day had consistently better hormonal profiles than those whose intake was weighted toward the evening, even when total calories were identical. The body is not indifferent to timing. It is a timed machine. The most common mistake here is adding food in the morning without removing it in the evening. That's not the adjustment. The adjustment is redistribution, same total, different timing. One real meal before 9 in the morning, protein, fat, substance, and evenings kept light. That's the rule I follow now. The third thing I changed was the one I resisted the longest, because it required me to admit something that men of my background rarely admit. I had a relationship with silence that was not healthy. Not the silence of peace. The silence of things I had decided not to look at. I had been carrying for years a specific kind of weight that lived in my chest and never fully released. Old stories, old decisions, old versions of myself that I kept in place through the simple act of never examining them. That weight had a physical cost I was not aware of until I found a way to begin putting it down. I am not going to describe what I did in terms that make it sound like a program or a practice. It was not a program. It was a habit I developed slowly and without a name for it, sitting still for 15 minutes in the morning before the day started. Not doing anything, not listening to anything, not solving anything. Just sitting with whatever was there. On some days, nothing was there. On most days, something was. I stopped trying to manage it and started just letting it be present for 15 minutes and then getting up. The body responds to that kind of release in ways I didn't expect. The research on this is not marginal, it is robust. Prolonged psychological tension, the kind that lives below the surface and never fully resolves, suppresses the same hormonal systems we are talking about. The body, in a persistent state of low-grade alert, diverts resources away from everything it considers non-essential to survival. 15 minutes of genuine stillness each morning, maintained consistently over weeks and months, begins to shift that baseline. 15 minutes, no method, no instruction, just sitting, every morning. None of these three things is difficult in isolation. The difficulty is that they require consistency over time, weeks, not days. And consistency requires believing that something is actually happening even before you can see it. That is harder than the habit itself. I kept going not because I was optimistic, but because I had decided I was done accepting the alternative. That decision turned out to be enough. The other thing I will say is that these three habits did not work the same way in isolation as they worked together with what I found to support them from the inside. I noticed this specifically because I began the habits first and the supplements second, so I have some sense of what each contributed. The habits created the conditions. The support I found accelerated what the habits had started. Together they moved at a pace that neither would have reached alone. That's the most honest account I can give. I'm 60 years old. I live in a small house in a quiet part of a small town. I have a backyard I use every morning and a marriage I value more than I can say clearly. 2 years ago, I was becoming a smaller version of myself without knowing how to stop it. Not dramatically. The way things diminish when you don't address them. Gradually, and then with increasing speed. The mornings arrived quieter. The evenings ended sooner. The distance between me and the man I recognized myself as being kept widening, and I had stopped measuring it because measurement had become painful. What I have described in this video is how I reversed that direction. Not with a dramatic intervention, not with a medical solution I had been waiting for someone to offer me. With 3 specific habits and one thing I found on my own, late at night, when I was finally desperate enough to stop dismissing things I didn't fully understand. I know there are men watching this who are exactly where I was. I know because I recognize the particular quality of attention that brings someone to a video like this. It is not casual. It is the attention of a man who has been looking for something real and keeps finding things that aren't. What I found is real. At least it has been real for me. The man my neighbor saw in the backyard at 6 in the morning, 3 times a week, is the same man who 2 years ago lay still on a Saturday morning and made a decision to stop accepting the answer he had been given. The difference between those 2 men is not genetics, is not luck, is not a particular version of willpower that most people don't have. It is a sequence of decisions made one at a time, starting from a place of anger that I eventually learned to aim at something useful. The question I want to leave in the comments is, have you ever felt angry at the system, at a doctor, at the standard answer you were given? And what did you do with that anger? Did it push you towards something, or did it just sit there, and you let it, I ask, because that anger was the most useful thing I had during the period I'm describing, and I think it might be worth understanding what men do with it. The link to what I use is in the description and pinned in the comments. Go there. Read through what's in it, not the marketing language, the actual ingredients and what each one does. Then make your own call. No urgency. No version of this where you have to decide today. But I want to say something plainly before I go. The body has a window. Not an emergency, not a countdown. A window. The capacity for things to change is not fixed, but it is not unlimited either. The vessels I was talking about, the ones that need to open, respond differently depending on how long they've been sitting in the state they're in. A year of low circulation is not the same as 5 years of it. The relationship that still has warmth in it, even if the warmth has been quiet for too long, is not the same as the one that has gone fully cold. There are things still within reach right now that require less distance to cover than they will in another 2 years of the same. I stayed the same for a long time because I told myself I was being realistic. I was not being realistic. I was being afraid of being disappointed again. Those are different things, and I know the difference now. What I've shared in this video and what's in the description belong together. Neither one replaces the other. The habits and the support I found are part of the same answer. The men who found their way back didn't have easier situations. They had a shorter distance between the moment they understood something had to change and the moment they actually changed it. That distance is the only thing that separates where you are from where you want to be.